By signaling Europe's weakness, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has increased the risk of a war with Russia. Garvan Walshe writes in an article you may find on our website, tvpworld.com. And to talk about it and more, we're joined by the author himself, Garvan Walshe, CEO of Article 7 Intelligence for Democracies and Foreign Affairs analyst, is with us. Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, before I ask you about what you have written in your article, first about the Russian gas. So import ban on Russian gas in the EU is coming into force today. How will it affect Europe's security?
Well, it's good that this is finally taking place. It's taken 4 years of war before we've got to this stage, which is really a bit too late. But it will help reduce the amount of money that goes into the Russian war effort. Together with sanctions, together with attempts to intercept the Shadow Fleet, we can slowly tighten the noose on Russia's war economy and therefore make it more difficult to continue to fight the war. So it's a step in the right direction. It's a shame it's taken so long for that step to be taken, but it's at least some progress.
Donald Trump says there are no plans to cut the number of U.S. troops in Europe, adding that the U.S. has good relations with Europe. What does it mean for the continent's security?
Well, I mean, there's a National Defense Authorization Act, which requires the U.S. to keep at least 75,000 troops in Europe. It requires them to set up a Baltic Security Initiative. What you're seeing in the U.S. is you're seeing a tussle between the Trump administration on the one hand and the Congress and the security establishment on the other. So Europe has many, many friends in the United States. They're just not necessarily in the White House, but they're in Congress, they're across the country, and they have been ensuring that the underlying elements of the transatlantic relationship can continue, and after Trump leaves office could eventually be revived. This is very important because Trump himself is a destructive force and is doing his best to weaken that relationship that has done so much for Europe and for the United States for 70 years now.
And you pay much attention to these relations in your article. So, in your article on our website, you criticize NATO Secretary General for saying that Europe can only dream about defending itself without the American military support. Now, is Mark Rutte's assumption incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, what he was trying to say first was saying, look, that Europe needs the United States needs Europe. He was trying to say there's a mutual dependency there, but then he got a bit carried away. And then he started saying, well, hold on. He started to talk about 10% of EU GDP. Now, 10% of EU GDP is about $3 trillion dollars, which would be 3 times the American defense budget. It's quite clear that the American defense budget is used not only in Europe, where it is supported by Europeans, but it's also used around the world to defend it. There's no way Europe would need that much money to be able to defend itself against Russia, which after all has an economy the same size as Belgium and the Netherlands. Yes, things are a lot cheaper to get in Russia, and yes, they're willing to send cannon fodder into battle, which we would not be. But it's quite clear that we have the industrial capacity and we have the economic resources to be able to defend against Russia on our own. Yes, we need time to rearm, and we've started doing that. Rheinmetall is producing 1.5 million shells a year now. That's actually more than the entire American artillery industry is producing. We're developing fighter jets. We're building more of them. We're increasing our stockpiles, which is critical. And we're also advancing in areas like air defense missiles where we had a gap. Yes, there are gaps to be filled, particularly in intelligence, but these are things that are within Europe's capability to fill. The hardest thing, obviously, is nuclear weapons because it's politically controversial, but it's not technically beyond European powers. There are already 2 European nuclear powers in France and the UK. France also has the missiles, although the UK uses American missiles for its nuclear warheads. This is within our capability, and it's absurd to suggest that it's the kind of thing that we'd be dreaming about. It requires some effort, but it's effort that European countries are starting to make, and it's effort that the European Union collectively is also trying to support.
Maybe you misunderstood the NATO Secretary General, because I think he was talking about the current situation, not about the future, however distant it may be, because it will take time definitely to rebuild Europe's deterrence capabilities, because after all, what can money save you from if you don't have an army ready to react right now, right? To the
we have 2 million soldiers under arms in Europe. We have in European militaries, we have more than 1,500 fighter jets. We have more artillery than the Russians. That's actually chiefly thanks to Finland. But we actually can mount a defensive operation against them already. There are again some gaps that will make it more difficult than it should be. But we have the capability. It's just that we haven't been preparing for many years. But we must also remember that Russia is currently bogged down in a war in Ukraine. It's losing 30,000 men a month. It has had most of its armored formations destroyed in that war, significant chunks of its air force also destroyed. Russia isn't fighting with a clean military capability. It's actually fighting with a pretty degraded capability. So realistically, we would be talking about the Europeans defending themselves against Russia with the support of Ukraine. And Ukraine can do this itself. It's very difficult for Ukraine, but it's doing it with only 100 billion support from Europe every year. Europe has resources that vastly outrange this, and we're also starting to see efforts to increase the size of armed forces. Though again, we would fight a bit differently from Russia. We wouldn't use manpower in the same way they would do. We would use more technology. We would use air power, where we have a significant advantage when you consider Europe as a whole. Even if you consider the Nordic countries plus Poland and the UK, they can numerically get pretty close to Russian number by number of fighter jet aircraft, but they also have better ones than Russia does. So I think he was being unreasonably pessimistic. The best interpretation we can say is how long it would take us to develop a nuclear capability equivalent to Russia's. But we don't need to do that. We need to deter Russian aggression. We don't need to match their ability to deter the American nuclear arsenal, which is a Russian concern, but it's only relevant in the nuclear arms race between Russia and the United States.
Well, the front line may be in Ukraine right now, but Russia is quite active in Europe as we speak. Now, today we had this case in Poland where an employee of the defense ministry was detained over spying for Russia and Belarus, maybe for decades. Now, how big is the scale of Russia's covert operations in Europe, and how much threat do they pose to our collective security?
I mean, it's very large, and it's been going on for a long time. And you see things like former Chancellor of Germany running Gazprom. There are numerous senior figures that have been suborned by the Russian security services over decades, and they obviously engage in conventional intelligence operations too, and they engage in sabotage, they engage in propaganda. All these things are part of Russia's attempt to divide and confuse its European allies, because the fundamental fact here is that although Russia is bigger than any one single other European state, when even 2 or 3 major European states gets together, they outmatch Russia economically, politically. And so Russia's need here is to try and divide Europeans as much as possible, prevent us acting together, and that way to preserve as much freedom of action for them. They know that we're too big to take on if we're united, so they try their best to divide us, and they use all kinds of subversive techniques that they're very, very good at, that they've been practicing for, decades, if not a century or thereabouts. That they used very effectively in the 1940s, and they're trying to use them again. They've sent huge amounts of money in to try and affect the Moldovan elections, for example. Estimates are between $50 to $100 million for a country of 2 million people. Those efforts were unsuccessful because Moldova was able to build up its resilience. The Moldovans understood what was happening, and the European Union supported Moldova. We can resist this hybrid assault by Russia, provided that we do so and provided that we stay united.
I love your optimism. Garvan Walshe, CEO of Article 7 Intelligence for Democrats and Foreign Affairs Analyst, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more news and interviews here on TVP World.